A glass plate negative sits on a white examination table. The date stamped in the corner reads 1899. The plate is damaged. A thin crack runs across its surface like a spider's web frozen in time. But this crack does something that should not be possible. It moves toward one of the figures in the photograph. Then it curves. It flows around the person's outline. It does not pass through them. This is not a digital creation. This is not a modern hoax. This is a physical object. The crack is real. The glass is real. The break happened in the physical world. How can a random fracture in glass appear to see the image printed on its surface? How can breaking glass know to avoid a person in a photograph? This is the story of that impossible photograph. It is a mystery that does not begin with a crime. It begins with a simple cardboard box found in the donation area of the Millbrook County Historical Archive. The archive sits on the edge of a small town in rural Pennsylvania. The building is old. The funding is limited. The staff is small. Martin Brady works there as the lead archivist. He has held this position for 12 years. His job is to process donations. He catalogs old letters. He preserves family documents. He sorts through boxes of forgotten photographs. Most days the work is routine. Most donations contain the same things: birth certificates, wedding photos, military discharge papers. The stories change, but the pattern stays the same. On a cold morning in October, Martin opens a new donation box. Inside are typical items from the late 1800s. There are cabinet cards showing stern-faced families. There are tintypes of young soldiers. There are studio portraits with elaborate backdrops. Martin works through the pile methodically. He notes the condition of each item. He records any visible dates or photographer marks. Then he picks up one particular glass plate negative. It is wrapped in old newspaper. The wrapping is yellowed and brittle. Martin carefully removes it. The plate shows a family group. They stand outside a church. 5 people are visible. Their clothing suggests the late Victorian era. The image quality is typical for the period. But something is wrong. Martin notices it immediately. A crack runs across the plate. The crack is not unusual by itself. Old glass plates break easily. Martin has seen hundreds of damaged negatives. This crack is different. Martin holds the plate up to the light. He traces the crack's path with his eyes. The fracture line moves from the left edge of the plate. It travels toward the center. It approaches the figure of a man standing in the middle of the group. Then the crack curves. It bends around the man's silhouette. It follows the outline of his body, his head, his shoulders, his arms. The crack avoids him completely. On the other side of the figure, the crack continues in a straight line again. Martin sets the plate down carefully. He checks the plate again under different lighting. The effect remains. The crack truly seems to flow around one specific person in the image. He opens the archive's acquisition log. He writes a detailed entry. He flags the plate for expert review. He notes the anomaly clearly. Something about this object requires explanation. The plate is sent to Casey Shepard 3 weeks later. Casey is a photographic conservator. She specializes in 19th century processes. Her laboratory is in Philadelphia. She has examined thousands of antique photographs. Casey receives the plate in a padded case. She reads Martin's notes. She places the plate on her light table. She looks at it for a long time. Her first step is authentication. Is this plate genuinely from 1899? Or is it a modern recreation designed to fool people? Casey examines the glass substrate itself. She measures its thickness. She tests its composition using non-destructive spectroscopy. The glass is consistent with late Victorian manufacturing. It contains the correct impurities. It shows the correct aging patterns. She examines the photographic emulsion. In 1899, photographers used gelatin dry plates. The emulsion was a thin layer of light-sensitive silver salts suspended in gelatin. This layer was coated onto the glass. Casey takes a tiny sample from the edge of the plate. She analyzes it under a microscope. The emulsion structure matches perfectly with gelatin dry plate technology. The silver particles show the correct size and distribution. There are no modern chemicals present. She examines the image itself. It shows a family of 5 people. They stand on the steps of a stone church. The women wear long dark dresses. The men wear suits with high collars. The clothing styles match the 1890s exactly. Casey writes her initial report. The object is authentic. It is a genuine gelatin dry plate negative from approximately 1899. The image content is consistent with the period. There are no signs of modern interference. Now she turns to the crack itself. She photographs it under high magnification. She maps its complete path across the plate. The crack is genuine physical damage to the glass substrate. It is not a surface scratch. It is not an etched line. It is a true fracture that goes through the full thickness of the glass. Casey sits back in her chair. She stares at the plate. She has a problem. A crack is a matter of pure physics. When glass breaks, the fracture follows the path of least resistance. It travels through the weakest points in the glass structure. It moves in relatively straight lines. It does not curve smoothly unless it hits an obstacle. The photographic image is just a thin layer on the surface. The emulsion is perhaps 20 microns thick. That is thinner than a human hair. It has no structural depth. It cannot affect how the glass underneath breaks. The crack should have gone straight through the figure in the photograph. The glass under that figure is the same as the glass everywhere else on the plate. There is no physical reason for the crack to avoid it. Casey runs calculations. She considers the probability. Given the crack's trajectory and the figure's position, the chance of the crack randomly avoiding the figure is less than 1 in 10,000. She calls Martin at the archive. She explains her findings. She tells him this object should not exist as it does. Something is wrong. They need to find out what. Martin suggests they bring in additional experts. Casey agrees. They need fresh perspectives. They need people who can think beyond the obvious answers. The first new theory comes from Aidan Baker. Aidan is a forensic analyst who sometimes consults on art fraud cases. Casey sends him detailed photographs of the crack. Aidan studies the images for 2 days. Then he calls with his assessment. Could this be an elaborate hoax? Could someone in 1899 have created this effect deliberately? The method would be complex but possible. An artist could take a genuine old plate. They could use a diamond-tipped tool to carefully etch a false crack line around one figure. If done skillfully, it might fool a casual observer. Casey tests this theory. She examines the crack under extreme magnification. She looks at the fracture edges. She photographs them at 200 times normal size. Real cracks have specific characteristics. The glass edge is rough and irregular. Tiny stress lines radiate outward. Small chips break away from the main fracture. The break pattern is chaotic at the microscopic level. Etched lines look different. They are smoother. They are more controlled. The tool leaves consistent marks. The edges have a different texture. Casey examines every millimeter of the crack. Every section shows the characteristics of a natural impact break. There are no tool marks. There are no signs of etching. If this is a hoax, it is perfect. Too perfect. She rules out the hoax theory. The crack is genuine damage. It happened naturally. The second theory involves chemistry. Malcolm Evie is a materials scientist. He wonders if some chemical process could explain the anomaly. Perhaps chemicals used in developing the photograph altered the glass structure. Perhaps a later restoration attempt introduced foreign materials. Maybe these chemicals created weak points that guided the crack's path. Casey performs new tests. She uses a scanning electron microscope to examine the glass along the crack line. She looks for contamination. She checks for unusual compounds. The results show nothing abnormal. The glass composition is uniform. There are no foreign materials along the crack edge. No unusual chemicals are present. The glass broke normally. It just broke in an impossible pattern. Two theories have failed. The team is stuck. The physical evidence makes no sense. Martin makes a suggestion during their next conference call. He says they have been looking at the problem wrong. They keep examining the glass. They keep studying the crack. They keep focusing on the physical object. Maybe they should stop looking at the glass. Maybe they should start investigating the people in the photograph. Who is the man that the crack avoids? Why does he seem important? The team agrees to shift their approach. Martin contacts Amora Rory. Amora is a local historian who specializes in the families and residents of small Pennsylvania towns in the 19th century. Martin sends Amora a digital scan of the photograph. He asks her to identify the people if possible. He gives her the rough date of 1899. Amora works from her home office. She has spent 30 years researching local history. She knows the families. She knows the buildings. She knows the stories. She looks at the photograph. She recognizes the church immediately. It is St. Timothy's Episcopal Church in the town of Ashford Mills. The church was built in 1887. It still stands today, though it is no longer used for services. She examines the people in the image. The woman on the left is elderly. She wears a cameo brooch. The man beside her is younger, probably her son. Two younger women stand on the right, likely daughters or daughters-in-law. In the center stands a man. He is perhaps 40 years old. He has a thick mustache. He wears a well-tailored suit. His posture is confident. His expression is serious. Amora cross-references her database. She checks church records from St. Timothy's. She reviews census data from 1900. She looks through local newspaper archives. She identifies the family. They are the Hutchinsons. Robert Hutchinson, the son, was a mill owner. His mother, Elizabeth, appears in the photograph. The two younger women are Robert's wife and sister, but the man in the center bothers Amora. She does not recognize him. His face does not match any Hutchinson family photographs she has seen. His presence feels wrong. She digs deeper. She searches through old business ledgers. She reviews court records. She reads through decades of local gossip columns in the Ashford Mills Register. She finds him. His name was Thomas Marley. He was a local businessman. He owned a dry goods store on Main Street. He was prominent in the town during the 1880s. But Thomas Marley's story took a dark turn. In 1891, his business failed. There were accusations of fraud. Some customers claimed he had sold them spoiled goods. Others said he had cheated them on prices. The community turned against him. His reputation collapsed. In late 1892, Thomas Marley left Ashford Mills. Records show he moved to Pittsburgh. He never returned. Amora finds the crucial detail in a census record. In 1899, when this photograph was supposedly taken, Thomas Marley was not in Ashford Mills. He was living 300 miles away. Why does a photograph from 1899 show a man who was not in town that year? Why is he posed with the Hutchinson family? Why does he stand in the place of honor in the center of the group? Amora calls Martin with her findings. Martin calls Casey. They conference together. They share Amora's research. They discuss the implications. Casey has a sudden thought. She asks Amora a specific question. Was photographic composition common in the 1890s? Amora confirms that it was. Photographers had learned to combine elements from different negatives. The process was difficult. It required great skill, but it was done regularly. Wealthy families sometimes commissioned composite portraits. A photographer might add a deceased relative to a family picture, or include a family member who lived far away. The goal was to create an ideal family image even if everyone could not be together. Casey returns to her laboratory. She retrieves the glass plate. This time she examines it with a completely different focus. She's not looking at the crack anymore. She's looking at the image itself. She uses a high-powered stereo microscope. She examines the emulsion layer at 400 times magnification. She focuses specifically on the area around Thomas Marley's figure. She works slowly. She scans every section of the image. She compares the grain structure in different areas. After 6 hours of careful examination, she sees it. The silver particles in the emulsion around Marley's figure are arranged differently. The grain pattern is microscopically distinct from the rest of the image. The difference is tiny. It would be invisible to the naked eye. It would be invisible under normal magnification. But at this extreme level of detail, it is clear. Thomas Marley was added to this photograph. He was not present when the original picture was taken. His image came from a different negative entirely. Casey understands what happened now. She calls the team. She explains the full process. The original photographer took a picture of the Hutchinson family outside St. Timothy's Church. This would have been in 1899 or shortly before. Thomas Marley was not present. Later, someone requested that Marley be added to the image. Perhaps the Hutchinsons wanted to honor their former friend despite his disgrace. Perhaps Marley himself commissioned the composite as a memento of better times. To create the composite, the photographer needed 2 negatives, one showing the Hutchinson family, one showing Thomas Marley. The photographer would have started with a fresh glass plate. They would have needed to mask certain areas during the exposure process. First, they painted a silhouette directly onto the glass plate. This mask covered the exact area where Marley's figure would appear. The photographer likely used a thick, opaque material. Rubber cement was common. So was a type of varnish called stopping out varnish. With the mask in place, the photographer exposed the plate to the Hutchinson family negative. The light passed through that negative and created an image on the fresh plate. But in the masked area, no image formed. That area remained blank. Then the photographer removed the first mask. They created a new mask that covered everything except the Marley-shaped area. They exposed the plate to Marley's negative. His image appeared in the previously blank space. The result was a seamless composite. One photograph showing 5 people who were never together. This explains everything. The masking material was a physical layer on the glass. It was thin, perhaps only 50 microns thick. But it was there. Over decades, this material bonded with both the glass substrate and the emulsion layer above it. It dried, it hardened, it became part of the object's structure. When the plate was later damaged, probably dropped or struck, a crack began to form. The fracture propagated through the glass. It followed the normal rules of physics. Then it encountered the masked area. Here, the glass structure was different. The dried varnish created a microscopic ridge. This ridge was a different material. It had different structural properties. The crack hit this invisible barrier. The path of least resistance changed. Instead of continuing straight through, the crack followed the edge of the varnish layer. It traced the outline of Thomas Marley's silhouette. The crack was not avoiding the image. It could not see the image. It was following the physical scar left by a 19th century darkroom technique. Sydney Alana is a photographer herself. Casey asks her to attempt to recreate the effect. Sydney works in her darkroom for 3 weeks. She uses period-accurate materials and methods. Sydney takes 2 separate photographs. She creates glass plate negatives using gelatin silver emulsion. She mixes stopping out varnish using a recipe from an 1895 manual. She paints a mask onto a fresh plate. She creates a composite image following the exact process Casey described. Then she deliberately damages the plate. The first attempt fails. The crack goes straight through. The second attempt also fails. On the third attempt, Sydney succeeds. The crack follows the varnish line. It curves around the masked figure. The effect is reproducible. The mystery has a physical explanation. Casey prepares a final report. She documents everything. She includes microscopic photographs showing the grain structure difference. She includes Sydney's recreation experiments. She explains the complete process. The mystery of the 1899 glass plate negative is solved. It was not a supernatural event. It was not an impossible anomaly. It was a ghost in the machine, an artifact of a long-lost photographic skill. The crack is a physical map. It reveals the hidden work of a 19th-century artist. It shows exactly where one image ends and another begins. For over a century, the secret was invisible. Then random damage exposed it. The plate now sits in a climate-controlled case at the Millbrook County Historical Archive. Martin Brady displays it with a detailed explanation. Visitors can see the crack. They can read about Thomas Marley and the Hutchinson family. They can learn about 19th-century photographic techniques. Leah Luciana is a photography professor who visits the archive regularly. She brings her students to see the plate. She uses it to teach them about the history of image manipulation. She reminds them that altering photographs is not a modern invention. People have been creating impossible images since the camera was invented. The plate has become famous in conservation circles. Camilla writes an article about it for the Journal of Photographic Preservation. Other archives contact Martin asking about similar anomalies in their collections. The crack that at once seemed impossible now makes perfect sense. It is a reminder that historical artifacts often contain stories far stranger than they first appear. Every object has a history. Every object was made by human hands using human techniques. Sometimes those techniques leave traces we do not expect. What appears supernatural often has a rational explanation. We simply need to look carefully enough. We need to ask the right questions. We need to examine our assumptions. The glass plate negative from 1899 taught everyone involved an important lesson. Physical evidence always tells a story. Sometimes that story is hidden. Sometimes it takes multiple experts working together to read it. But the story is always there, waiting to be discovered. Martin still works at the archive. He still processes donations. He still sorts through boxes of old photographs. But now he looks more carefully. He examines damage patterns. He considers what invisible histories might be hidden in plain sight. Casey still examines antique photographs in her laboratory. She has found 2 more composite plates since solving the Marley case. Neither showed the dramatic crack effect. But both contained the telltale signs of masking and multiple exposures. The technique was more common than anyone realized. The crack runs around Thomas Marley's figure. It does not run through it. Now we know why. Now we understand the hands that created it and the accident that revealed it. The impossible has become possible. The mystery has become history.